This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China and the US agreed to stop imposing new trade tariffs after landmark meeting between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. We examine how the civil war in Yemen is impacting African countries, the Saudi Arabian-led coalition, and why some analysts think foreign influences in Libya are complicating the quest for peace in the troubled North African state. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, Chinese President Xi Jinping appeals to world leaders to uphold free and fair trade practices. And positives for South Africa despite losing to Nigeria in the Africa Women's Cup of Nations final. And we begin with a big development in the trade tensions between China and the United States after Chinese President Xi Jinping met his American counterpart Donald Trump in Buenos Aires. The two sides have agreed to step back from the brink with an agreement to stop imposing new tariffs.
During a working dinner, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, along with their delegations, agreed to stop imposing new tariffs on January 1st. They also decided to step up negotiations toward eliminating all other tariffs. President Xi said as the world's two largest economies, China and the U.S. shoulder important responsibilities in world peace and stability, making cooperation the best choice. He said the two sides should work together to get trade relations back to normal, and that the consensus reached will be good for the global economy. He also said China will speed up its reform and opening up and expand imports. The two presidents agreed that the two countries can and should ensure the success of China-U.S. relations. Echoing Xi Jinping's comments, Trump called the meeting amazing and productive. He said the U.S.-China relationship is very special, noting the country's important roles in the world. The U.S. hopes to do more work with China in areas including education, cultural exchange, and law enforcement. As for Taiwan, Trump said his government sticks to the One China principle. The two heads of state also discussed the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, with Trump praising China's positive role in the issue. Christy Skull, CGTN.
Our reporter Zhu Yun has more on the meeting from Buenos Aires.
The highly anticipated meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump has finally concluded with the major consensus reached, and China and the United States have agreed not to impose more tariffs starting January the 1st next year, and that's Chinese Vice Minister of Commerce Wang Shouwen said during the press conference that concluded late in Saturday. And he also explained that for those remaining 25% of additional tariff, the two working teams will set up negotiation in the direction of a complete cancellation of all of these additional tariffs. And Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the two presidents had a profound discussion that lasted about 2.5 hours, which is much longer than scheduled. And during the meeting, both sides agreed to set up negotiations towards the elimination of all additional tariffs, and China will keep with its domestic market needs and people's needs to increase the imports, including the marketable products from the U.S., in an effort to gradually ease the imbalance in the two-way trade. Moreover, both sides also agreed to take active actions on the protection of law enforcement and the control of illicit narcotics. That includes the control of fentanyl. And so far, China's actions in this regard have been fully recognized by the international community, and that being said includes the United States. And China will also schedule all forms of fentanyl and start the fentanyl substances and start the adjustment of the related regulations.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on world leaders to stick to openness and uphold a free and fair trade. Speaking at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires, President Xi said economic globalization should benefit people from all countries.
It's an event that has captured the attention of the globe. International trade has once again topped the agenda of this year's G20 Leaders Summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping urged the group to adhere to free trade and to keep expanding open markets. The Chinese leader said that the international community should insist on inclusiveness and ensure that the benefits of economic globalization are shared equally by all. President Xi was insistent that only a rules-based international order could lead to the healthy development of global trade. On the summit's sidelines, China, France, and the United Nations presented a commitment to implementing the Paris Agreement. President Xi urged the international community to do their part in what he calls the building of a shared future for all mankind, and take greater action to realize the landmark climate accord. He asked that developed countries fulfill the pledge of raising $100 billion each year before 2020, and transfer technologies to developing countries to help them improve their capacity to cope with climate change. G20 leaders largely agreed. They reaffirmed that the Paris Agreement is irreversible and committed to its full implementation. And while many pressing questions remain unresolved, the gathering of world leaders did manage to conclude with a joint declaration. Daniel Plafker, CGTN.
President Xi also called for cooperation and openness in the global economy in his speech at the G20 summit. Onesisa Mtua, a development policy specialist in South Africa, now examines China's role in the world economy, as well as how the principles of multilateralism captured in President Xi's speech can benefit African countries.
I think a lot of developing countries have suffered by not having access to particular markets simply because it hasn't been profitable for them to even export to that particular market. Increasing trade tariffs and keeping out imports is really an old model, of economic growth. And now we're moving towards a more innovative, less labor-intensive, more energy conscious, more environmentally conscious, more collaborative, a big interest in global development. So Xi Jinping's emphasis of these particular, values and this sort of wanting to unify the global economy, rings very important for a country like South Africa, that is a smaller player, that is reliant on these big economies for their exports and for their presence in the global economy.
Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is expected in Algeria for a two-day visit. He is resuming his tour of Arab countries after the G20 summit in Argentina. The Algerian leg is part of his first trip abroad.
The visit by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to Algeria is a friendly and fraternal visit for the President of the Republic, Abdelaziz Bouteflika. We will not discuss OPEC issues.
Algeria has lost much because of Saudi positions, whether political or economic. Oil markets and prices are manipulated by Saudi Arabia to the detriment of Algerian interests. But at the same time, Algeria is looking for some stability for its major political events in 2019, like presidential elections.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate has voted to advance a resolution to end U.S. military support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen's civil war. A final vote is expected within days. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Arab states have been battling in Yemen since 2015 to restore a government driven out by the Houthis, Shiite Muslim fighters that Yemen's neighbors view as agents of Iran. Egypt is a member of the Arab coalition forces. CGTN's Yasser Hakim takes a look at how Egypt can be affected by the U.S. decision.
The U.S. is a major contributor to the Arab coalition in Yemen, led by Saudi Arabia. The aim of the coalition is to fight off the Houthis. Therefore, the news of a possible withdrawal of the U.S. from the Arab coalition could be a worrying issue.
The U.S. Foreign and Defense Departments released their evidence that the Houthis and other terrorist groups in Yemen and Afghanistan have received Iranian weapons. And if the U.S. withdraws, then Yemen will fall into Iran's power. And Iran will also control the whole Gulf region. So it's not just a concern for Egypt and Arab states, but for the U.S. too.
Egypt's role in the Arab coalition is to protect trade through the Red Sea area from Houthi piracy and prevent any terrorist attempts to close down the all-important Yemeni straits. With a stricken economy, Egypt could feel the financial impact of such a military campaign.
Egypt has the 10th largest army in the world, but it costs a lot to maintain such power, and Egypt doesn't receive direct financial support for its involvement in this conflict. But it feels the importance of protecting the Gulf nations. So if Saudi Arabia falls, it will be followed by UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait.
There's been a high loss of lives, nearly 10,000 people, and a humanitarian catastrophe emanating from the war. Some believe that this, along with the possibility of a US exit, could push members like Egypt to call for an end to the conflict. Cairo has not responded to the news from Washington. However, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has recently stated that the security of the Gulf states is a priority for Egypt, clearly indicating that he would not drop out of the war in Yemen. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, the war in Yemen has had devastating effects. An estimated 85,000 children have died from starvation as a result of the conflict. But an unlikely country suffering the consequences of the war is Somalia. Political analyst Ahmed Werli Hussein puts the issue in perspective.
It has had an impact on Somalia politically, economically, and socially. Socially, a lot of Somalis live in Yemen, and we also have a lot of Yemenis who fled the war in Yemen to Somalia. They fled to a country that was already struggling with war. The instability in Yemen has also had a security consequence on Somalia. There was a flow of weapons from Yemen with little control of where they ended up. They might have ended up in the hands of Islamist militias that are fighting in Somalia and could be used to fight anybody. In Somalia, people have traded weapons from Yemen, and several such cases have been seen in Somalia since the fighting in Yemen began.
Well, let's now head to North Africa, where the US State Department has approved funding for the purchase of military equipment by Egypt. The process had earlier been put on hold after human rights concerns were raised in Egypt. Daniel Renches has this report.
The US State Department's approved 2 deals worth a combined $1.2 billion to be spent from funds allocated by the US Congress to purchase US military equipment for Egypt. The deal is subject to a statutory 30-day oversight period where the US Congress could disapprove and potentially block or hold the sale. Now, Human Rights Watch has told us that it's now actively lobbying key lawmakers to do just that. It includes an estimated $1 billion to buy 10 state-of-the-art Apache helicopters in a package deal which would include a whole range of equipment and services, including maintenance, inspections, night vision technology, for example. The US Defense Security Cooperation Agency says the intention is to help Egypt to counter terrorist activities emanating from the Sinai Peninsula that undermine regional stability. Now, Human Rights Watch Washington Director Sarah Margon says they are concerned, though, about the indiscriminate targeting of civilians and militants in that area, which she says amounts to, quote, collective punishment, which risks radicalizing the general population there. The US has also authorized 56,000 rounds of 2 forms of tank shells for the purpose of target practice, with an estimated cost of $201 million. Now, last year, then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson suspended arms sales to Egypt because of ongoing human rights concerns, following similar moves by the Obama administration. But the current Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has issued a national security waiver in August. Human Rights Watch says this sale sends a message of positive reinforcement of Egypt's human rights crackdown under the guise of anti-terrorism. Daniel Renches, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Why some analysts think foreign influences in Libya are complicating the quest for peace in the troubled North African state. And what South Africa is doing to reduce its world-leading caseload of HIV infections.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
To Tunisia now, where regional efforts to bring stability to Libya have been ongoing. Foreign influence and the inability of Libyans to compromise for peace are seen as a major challenge. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi tells us more.
The Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies organized the Libya Peace Forum in the capital city Tunis. Tunisian and Libyan politicians, scholars and analysts shed light on the alarming security situation in the North African country.
Libya and Tunisia share more than 450 kilometers in their border region. We Libyans consider Tunisia as one of the pillars of our national security. There are growing threats alongside the border region, especially from armed groups, smugglers and terror networks, who took advantage from reigning chaos to control portions of territories.
Experts in Libyan affairs maintain that the political settlement in the North African state is no longer in the hands of Libyans.
There are many foreign actors in Libya. Each country has its own interests. Bringing all Libyan stakeholders to the negotiating table is now impossible. France and Italy have influenced talks between Libyans in a negative way. The tension during the Palermo conference, which occurred on the heels of the Paris Peace Forum, led to an escalation of conflict in Libya.
Experts emphasize the role of Tunisia, Algeria and Egypt in convincing Libyans to make political concessions and to lower demands in order to reach a new peace agreement.
Many of the rival factions in Libya are armed and backed by foreign forces. The conflict can last for decades. Tunis, Algiers and Cairo are among the main Libyan neighbors who can convince Libyans to accept a peaceful settlement. Otherwise, the whole region will remain unstable.
Analysts argue that it will be difficult to hold elections in Libya in the next 2 years. The Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies emphasized the important role played by the United Nations to achieve a consensus and a comprehensive political settlement in Libya.
This year, Tunisia has completed the second phase of a 200-kilometer barrier along its border with Libya designed to deter terrorism. Authorities maintain that hundreds of Tunisian terrorists were trained by terror cells on Libyan soil. Adnan Chauchi, CGTN, Tunis.
To Zimbabwe now, where an independent commission of inquiry into post-election violence that rocked the southern African nation has presented a summary of its findings to President Emmerson Mnangagwa. The commission is due to submit its final report soon. 6 people died after the army was called in to quell the violent protests on August the 1st. CGTN's Faram Wakutuya has more on that.
Just 2 days after concluding public hearings, the Kgalema Motlanthe-chaired commission submitted what it's called an executive summary of its findings. Since October, it's been gathering testimony from survivors of the violence, eyewitnesses, senior police and army commanders, as well as leaders of political parties. It did not, however, call the president or the defense minister at the time, whose testimony observers thought would have been insightful in answering questions about the military deployment. Despite footage showing soldiers firing live ammunition, the army denies killing any demonstrators and says its response was proportionate to the threat posed. The opposition claims the inquiry was set up to blame it for inciting protesters. President Emmerson Mnangagwa promised to make public the findings of the 7-member commission, which was also tasked with coming up with recommendations on the action to be taken on its report. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
South Africa has the highest HIV infections on the continent. However, efforts are being made to reduce this as the government injects increased resources into HIV programs, and things seem to be taking a turn for the better.
With around 7.2 million people living with HIV/AIDS, South Africa ranks top in prevalence rates in the world. This number accounts for 11% of the total population. As the country emerged from the unjust apartheid rule in 1994, HIV/AIDS matters were not given priority until the country found political stability. The high figures and sobering reality is largely blamed on the failure of previous governments to invest in HIV prevention programs. Now, things are changing. President Cyril Ramaphosa has increased financing for HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment programs, making it one of the largest such undertaking by governments in the world.
I think to tackle Nigeria, you need to start at the beginning with basic teaching. So I think it starts within the home structure. So teaching needs to start in the home, and then within your school or your church or whatever religious sector you belong to. And then government also needs to get involved. It needs to be hands-on, practical doing. We can't be talking and having no action. Action, prayer, we need all of that, but we do need people to become involved. So nobody must walk around with the attitude, it doesn't affect me. We should say it's affecting all of us. What can I do to make a difference? How can I help?
Currently, South Africa has the largest antiretroviral treatment program in the world. More people are getting tested and put on medication, even though the country is still wrestling with a high infection rate.
Never been tested before, so this is first time for me. So it's quite nerve-wracking. Not so much for like the result that I'm expecting, but more as just the whole procedure and the whole sitting around and waiting for it to happen. It's more like you just want to get in there, have yourself pricked, and then to walk out. But it's the waiting and anticipation makes you a bit nervous, yeah.
I have been diagnosed 27 years ago with HIV, and today is a day for me to celebrate my cleaning time of living my life as a male 27 years ago and being active in society, and look at how this disease has changed my life and my outlook on where I was supposed to be. I don't think I would want it to change any of myself or my journey, because it has opened doors for me, and I'm an entrepreneur. When a door opens, I put my foot in, and that's me.
It was reported recently that a 9-year-old HIV patient made full recovery after 40 weeks of antiretroviral treatment, a milestone of sorts. As the world observes World AIDS Day, many South Africans living with HIV/AIDS have every reason to smile and hope in the knowledge that the disease is no longer a death sentence. Edmond Nyabola, CGTN.
And as you've just heard, South Africans are being urged to get tested for the HIV virus. More than 7.5 million people are infected with the virus in the country. CGTN's Julie Shire sat down with Namasonto Shlongwangne, who only discovered her status after losing her husband.
Nomasonto's Shosola Hongwane's husband never disclosed his HIV-positive status. Her world was turned upside down just over a year ago when she discovered he was dying of AIDS.
At the beginning, I was very angry. I was crying at night, asking myself why he didn't tell me about it. Why he didn't come out and say, look, I'm sick. It was bad and it was difficult for me. How am I going to tell my kids? How am I going to tell my family, my friends? I was scared.
Fearing the worst and never having tested before, she went to the Unjani clinic with a panicked heart.
Nomasonto was not well. She was very sick and she was going through a lot of things. And then I advised her to test. And she did test and we find the results. And then she started treatment since then and she's doing very well.
Mrs. Agele helped me out and speak to me about this disease, that it's not a death sentence. I must be strong. I must look after myself. Look at me now. I'm strong. I'm living with it. There's no more fear. I don't fear it anymore.
Nomasonto and millions of other HIV-positive South Africans take these life-saving drugs every day. Antiretrovirals suppress the virus and maintain a healthy level of white blood cells.
The community still need to be more educated to accept the thing that HIV is like any chronic disease. You don't apply for it. If you've got it, you need to accept that it's there and you go and get help.
More than 7.5 million South Africans are infected. Almost a third are not on treatment. Nomasonto stresses it's important to get tested.
It is going to destroy me if I just listen to what people are saying about me. It's my life, my choice. Because people are hiding it and they are dying. So I don't want to die. So I don't care what people are saying about me. Even if they see me live on TV, it's fine. What about you? At least I know my status. What about you?
The more people we test, the more people we can put on treatment. The more people on treatment, the more people with a lower viral load. And then the less people that will be infected, with HIV.
South Africa has managed to reduce the rate of new infections, but the number is still high. More than 230 people contracted HIV in 2017, most of them young men between the ages of 15 and 24. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Nigeria has signed a United Nations pledge to end HIV/AIDS by 2030. Although the country is making progress in tackling the epidemic, several challenges persist. This includes poor access to treatment and inadequate funding, as Philly Haza explains.
Prevalence of HIV is high.
Gloria Blessing and her team are trying to end HIV/AIDS in Nigeria. Diagnosed HIV positive 18 years ago, Gloria has struggled with her health. But since moving to Abuja, where she has easy access to antiretrovirals, she's doing much better.
I'm very much happy that I'm privileged to be in the city where I get my treatments, my ARV drugs free, without paying anything, compared to the rural area where my colleagues or my friend is finding it difficult.
Although the government offers free ARV drugs countrywide, some hospitals in rural areas impose levies before patients can access the treatment, a practice that slowed Nigeria's progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS. The United Nations says more than half of West Africa's HIV-positive population lives in Nigeria. In 2016 alone, the country recorded 220,000 new infections and nearly 200,000 AIDS-related deaths. Activists maintain the government needs to increase the funds it allocates to HIV treatment.
Currently, we have 3.4 million Nigerians that are estimated to be living with HIV, and out of this population, only about 1.2 million Nigerians that are accessing the treatment. But government is contributing to less than 100,000 of those that are accessing the treatment. That shows clearly that HIV treatment in Nigeria is being funded mostly by donor partners, and that the issue of local content, local ownership of the response is not there.
However, the World Health Organization says over the past decade, Nigeria has gradually increased the funds it allocates to tackling the epidemic.
It is achievable. It's still, and I think if you look at the funding, it has been increasing. In other words, we are looking at the funding from PEPFAR as a major funder, the Global Fund, and then the government. So the government portion has actually been increasing. both state-specific funding that they are dedicating to HIV, as well as federal funding.
That said, the WHO estimates Nigeria still needs to double its current spending, which has reached $500 million so far this year.
Experts say the government needs to intensify its efforts in fighting HIV and AIDS by ensuring more people know their status and those living with HIV have better access to treatment. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
And here's a quick recap of the headlines this hour. There has been a big development in the trade tensions between China and the United States after Chinese President Xi Jinping met his American counterpart Donald Trump in Buenos Aires. The two sides have agreed to step back from the brink with an agreement to stop imposing new tariffs. Chinese President Xi Jinping has also called on world leaders to stick to openness and uphold free and fair trade. Speaking at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires, President Xi said economic globalization should benefit peoples from all countries. The U.S. Senate has voted to advance a resolution to end U.S. military support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen's civil war. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have been battling in Yemen since 2015 to restore a government driven out by the Houthis, the Shiite Muslim fighters. And in Tunisia, regional efforts to bring stability to Libya have been ongoing. Analysts say foreign influences and the inability of Libyans to compromise for peace are now very major challenges in securing lasting peace for the North African state. And that's a look at your headlines. Well, let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's coming up. Kenya's M-Pesa mobile money transfer service linked with China's WeChat platform.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Kenyan telecoms giant Safaricom's M-Pesa users are now able to send money instantly to users of China's largest payment and social media application, WeChat. The partnership between Family Bank Limited and London-based financial technology firm SimbaPay will enable users in Kenya to send money to over $9.7 million. The cost of the transactions will vary on a sliding scale. Besides M-Pesa, Family Bank customers will also send money to WeChat wallets through the bank's Pesa Pap mobile banking application and USD service. Revenues from the transactions will be split between SimbaPay and Family Bank. Nigeria's lawmakers have renewed calls to revoke a license awarded to oil giant Shell following a report claiming the country stands to lose more than $6 billion in revenue under the existing contract. Shell and Eni were awarded the contract in 2011, but exploration could not start after allegations of bribery were leveled against them. CGTN's Kelechi Kalam has more.
There are three main ways in which the government of Nigeria generates revenue from oil production.
Investigators commissioned by anti-corruption NGO Global Witness are presenting their findings to Nigerian authorities. At the center of the investigation is the award of an offshore drilling contract for an oil block called OPL 245, commonly referred to as the Malibu Scandal. The deal involves oil giants Shell and Eni paying $1.3 billion allegedly for exploration rights. But investigators claim that payment was a bribe and that the money went to Malibu, a company linked to former Petroleum Minister Danny Tete. The report by Global Witness also alleges the terms of the contract deprived Nigeria of oil revenues.
There is more corruption because contracts are secret, and there's a global movement away from secret oil contracts because the discretionary power that's given to ministers and some senior officials often results in bad deals for the country. So the global standard now is to have contracts be fully disclosed when they're signed, and the more disclosure there is, the more likely it is that governments will get a fair deal.
Current and former executives at Shell and Eni are already facing corruption charges in Italy in connection with the deal. Italian prosecutors allege the officials knew that the money they paid was a bribe, a claim supported in the Global Witness report. Shell and Eni have denied any wrongdoing, but if Nigeria's lawmakers get their way, both companies could lose their prospecting licenses.
The position of the House of Reps that the Nigerian government must urgently review the OPL contract agreement, considering new discoveries that have provided further insights into the rip-off. The controversial terms on OPL C-245 compromises Nigeria's potential revenue from the oil block, considering that the contract is hugely at variance with terms on which Shell had been awarded similar license in 2003.
Global Witness, an advocacy group known for its anti-corruption campaign against the exploitation of mineral resources, hopes exposes like this will encourage more transparency in the sector. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Egypt recently signed an agreement with the Hungarian-Russian coalition to revamp its railway fleet. As part of the deal, staff at Egypt's SEMAF railway equipment factory will receive training in the manufacturing of 1,300 state-of-the-art coaches. SEMAF is the only factory in the Middle East and North Africa that supplies regional railway networks. CGTN's Adel Mahroui has more.
It's the biggest deal in the history of Egypt's Railroad Authority. Valued at $1.2 billion, it will introduce 1,300 new coaches to the aging railway network. As part of the deal, state-owned company SEMAF will receive the technology to produce these advanced trains in Egypt.
The 1,300 coach deal comes with a loan. The lenders will dictate the percentage of the domestic manufacturing component. The law states it shouldn't be less than 40%. This deal will greatly enhance our capabilities. Until now, Egypt hasn't had the technology to manufacture stainless steel trains.
Most of SEMAF coaches are made of iron and used for standard cargo and passenger services. But under the Russian-Hungarian agreement, the factory will be able to manufacture coaches from start to finish right here in Egypt.
To import trains is expensive and doesn't make use of the available local manpower. About 100 industries support locomotive manufacturing. When these coaches are produced at SEMAF, we will cut costs by at least 50%.
For more sophisticated machinery, such as that used for underground railway lines, the percentage of locally manufactured components drops to about 25%. Adopting modern technology and enhancing the factory's capabilities have become crucial for SEMAF's survival in the global market.
The future of SEMAF and depends solely on Egypt's needs. As an organization, we don't depend on the state for funding. This is why we need to expand our exports and form new partnerships with international companies. General Electric has a contract to supply 100 locomotives to Egypt. After evaluating SEMAF's infrastructure, it's decided to manufacture half of them here, which is a first.
With the additional expertise gained from the General Electric deal, Egypt is planning to manufacture locomotives for the African and Arab markets. SEMAF has its eyes on two more deals, a high-speed train that will connect the Red Sea with the Mediterranean and an intra-city monorail in the capital, Cairo. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. A group of Somali women preach peace and reconciliation despite constant fear of militant attacks.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
As Somalia continues to grapple with the threats posed by Al-Shabaab, women are calling for peace and an end to violent extremism. They have also called for a full participation of women in peace-building processes. A meeting held recently in the capital, Mogadishu, brought together hundreds of women from different regions. Women have been caught up in the violent campaign being waged by the Al-Qaeda-linked group. Now they are pushing to be involved in rebuilding of Somalia through participation in peace-building and reconstruction.
Women are really wanted to have a peace, and to have the reconciliation is very important. One of the things is always women, when it comes to the reconciliation, we're not in there. We might just talk, but we're never involved. And this is a new beginning for Somali women to really be part of the negotiation. To be part of the reconciliation and to actually have a peace in Somalia. And that is...
There's much excitement ahead of the global Citizen Mandela 100 concert being staged in Johannesburg later this Sunday. Global Citizen is an international movement that calls on world leaders to end extreme poverty and reduce inequality by 2030, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The concert features a star-studded lineup of local and international artists. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africans have wasted no time in taking up the challenge to become part of the global citizen movement. They've been hard at work in communities, holding leaders to account for the challenges faced by millions of people.
The response from South Africans has been absolutely overwhelming. It's the largest ever campaign we've ever initiated. Over 5 million actions have been taken by global citizens to earn tickets to the Global Citizen Festival. Because the thing that makes us unique is you can't buy a ticket, you have to earn it. Your social action is your currency.
Global Citizen encourages change through active citizenry. It's partnered with the Motsepe Foundation to bring the movement to South Africa in celebration of Nelson Mandela's centenary. The late statesman believed ending poverty was an act of justice, a vision the foundation shares.
The foundation, since its inception, we have focused on poverty alleviation. We work a lot with communities from very poor rural areas.
Unfinished business and bring the Global Citizen movement in full force to South Africa with the largest ever Global Citizen Festival we've ever produced, headlined by the greatest artists in the world: Beyonce, Jay-Z, Coldplay, Pearl Jam, Ed Sheeran, Pharrell Williams, Femi Kuti, together with Tiwa Savage, Casper Neuvest, the greatest artists from across the continent and around the world taking action in unison to see an end to extreme poverty.
South Africans will be rewarded for their good deeds on Sunday.
Doing good can be fun because people who are going to the stadium have earned their tickets to participate, to get to the stadium. So this is really exciting.
Everyone here is coming together and taking the action to work for the tickets and be involved in celebrating Madiba's 100 years. It also gives an important message at the same time. So you're getting to learn something and getting to be an activist at the same time, as well as engaging in such a special event.
Global citizens around the world have generated over 14 million actions in the last 6 years. It's prompted almost $40 billion in commitments to help tackle poverty in communities like these. South Africans will urge global leaders attending the concert to do the same. Julie Shire, CGTN, Tembisa Township, South Africa.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. There are positives for South Africa despite losing to Nigeria in the Africa Women's Cup of Nations final.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
And we begin with football, where Nigeria has retained the Africa Women's Cup of Nations title after beating South Africa on post-match penalties in the final in Accra, Ghana. The match had ended in a goalless draw in regular and extra time, sending the decision to penalties. The Super Falcons eventually prevailed 4-3. The victory leaves Nigeria with a record 9 titles in 10 editions, while South Africa have yet to win the continental competition. CGTN Sadiq Shaban has more from Accra.
The defending champions were pushed all the way in the finals by a stubborn South African side seeking to make a double in this tournament. Both teams played to a barren draw in the regulation time, and the match was decided in the penalty kicks, where South Africa lost a key penalty, giving Nigeria their victory here.
This is our trophy, yeah!
Tell me about it.
Oh, I feel so good. This is 9 times out of 11. It's so special for us, entire Nigerians. Just celebrate.
She agreed for me to play football.
It's rare for girls like Mardia to have their talent shaped from an early age, and many still battle social stigma.
When I was in JHS, some teachers were saying that when I played football, I can't give birth and then I'll become muscular.
Nimobi was formed in 2008 to promote gender equality in sports. It's funded by the club's managers with support from NGOs.
When we started training these girls, they didn't know how to play football, and people from their communities didn't support the idea. But after a few years, the girls' skills improved, and now people come to watch them play.
The club's manager says some parents don't let their daughters play football as they are worried they will abandon their studies.
We formed this club not only for the girls to play football, but also to empower them. We give them training so that they will be able to become responsible people in future.
With more clubs like this, Ghana's national women's team will certainly have an array of talented players to choose from.
Over the hosting of the 2019 African Cup of Nations following the withdrawal of hosting rights from Cameroon. Morocco and Egypt have been cited as countries with ready infrastructure should they get the nod. The Egyptian government has hinted more than once that Egypt is willing to host any CAF event at any time. For more on that, here's Adel Makhroui.
Right after CAF stripped off Cameroon from its hosting rights for the 2019 African Cup of Nations, members of the Egyptian Football Association started speaking up. 2 elected board members say that the EFA will support Morocco's bid to host the continent's first 24 teams competition. One member, Khaled Latif, appeared confident that Morocco will win that bid, clarifying that talks have been already ongoing and that many African associations are already on board that North African bid. Previously, Hani Abu Reida, the EFA president, said he won't clash with Morocco for the 2019 African competition. Meanwhile, when the Cameroon hosting crisis began, the Egyptian sports minister repeatedly stressed that Egypt has the power to host the AFCON.
Egypt is very rich with its youth and sports facilities. We host numerous international sports events all year long. Egyptian sports associations are always keen to organise in the best technical, managerial and modern way. We will always welcome hosting any CAF event at any time. I stress again, at any time.
Although it may seem as a contradiction, there hasn't been any official announcement yet about whether Egypt will support Morocco or enter this fresh bid. Supporting Morocco could be part of a bigger deal. Cairo has been preparing to file for hosting the 2030 FIFA World Cup. Backing Morocco for next year's AFCON is maybe to make Africa united behind Egypt when it approaches FIFA for the World Cup. Adel Makhroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Zimbabwean football is still trying to shake off its association with match fixing more than 8 years after the damaging Asia Gate scandal involving more than 90 players and officials. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya has more from Harare.
Zimbabwe's FA has adopted 3 R's to fight the cancerous vice which threatens football's sacrosanct values of respect and fair play.
Recognize that there's an attempt to fix the match. Resist that particular attempt and report to relevant authorities who will take appropriate action.
The strategy is underpinned by continuous education.
All our courses that we have done, all our capacity building programs, we have tried as much as possible to ensure that we educate to our officials the dangers of match fixing. how it destroys the valuable aspects in our game. We have also tried as much as possible to sanction officials who would have been implicated in match fixing. Around 2014, we even sanctioned some referees that had fixed the matches in Chegutu. They were sanctioned, given bans over 10 years.
Its efforts are paying off and grabbing headlines, this time for all the right reasons. Local referee Norman Matemera blew the whistle on an attempt to bribe him with $10,000 to influence a CAF Confederations match he took charge of in April. His stance won him praise at home and abroad.
By doing so, one becomes a role model, and those people who would want to be involved in match fixing in future would be scared away.
It also proved that the beautiful game is not beyond redemption. Farai Mokutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
To boxing now, and American Deontay Wilder has retained his WBC heavyweight title after a split decision draw with Britain's Tyson Fury at Staples Center in Los Angeles on Saturday. The hard-hitting Wilder knocked Fury down twice, but the Briton controlled much of the fight behind his long jab, precise footwork and stout defense. The Briton was floored in the 9th round and brutally dropped in the 12th, somehow regaining his feet to survive for 2 minutes. Judges Alejandro Rochin of Mexico scored the fight 111-15 to 111 to Wilder. Robert Taper of Canada had 114 to 112 for Fury, and Phil Edwards of the United Kingdom had the bout even at 113 all. And that's it on this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send your feedback, the contact on your screen, and follow us on our digital media platforms. Thank you for watching. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. From me and the team here on Africa Live, thank you for watching and bye-bye.